Welcome to the Berkowitz and Hanna Love of the Law podcast, where passion meets practice and experience drives insight. Today, managing partner Russ Berkowitz and partner Jen Amdur dive into how artificial intelligence is reshaping the world of personal injury and medical malpractice law, from predicting case outcomes and uncovering evidence faster than ever, to tackling questions of bias, ethics, and the courtroom of the future. This conversation explores how AI is changing the way justice is pursued and protected. All right, we're here, episode 9 of the Berkowitz and Hanna Love of the Law podcast. I'm excited to talk to my good friends, Russ Berkowitz and Jen Amdur. So let's jump into the topics at hand. My first question, how is AI being used to evaluate the strength of personal injury and medical malpractice claims before they ever go to trial?
It's an interesting question. I think that in general, AI is somewhat in its early stages and somewhat not in its early stages. I think that to that specific question, depending upon the AI platform you're using, right, you can get fairly good case evaluations based on other like cases. Some of the platforms I think are ranging cases, low, medium, and high. And I think from a PI perspective, at least on the personal injury side, they have a pretty good volume of verdicts and published settlements that those platforms can kind of pull from, which has made them, I would say, and what I've seen at least, quite reliable in giving you those ranges, right? Are you on the low side, kind of the average side, or on the higher side? At least for settlement numbers. Verdicts are so unpredictable. I think it's harder for anyone, including AI, to really predict what six or more, individuals are going to do. My take on the med mal part of this is that many medical malpractice settlements are confidential and many malpractice verdicts are kind of all over the place. Malpractice cases are highly emotional cases, they're highly specific to the facts of the case. And so while I think the AI platforms are trying their best to pull those numbers, I don't think they have as much data to pull from because of the confidential nature of settlements and the really varied nature of medical malpractice verdicts to give you too specific of an assessment of a medical malpractice settlement or verdict.
And if I can add to that, I get calls all the time from different lawyers saying, "Hey, are you guys using a personal injury, medical malpractice AI program?" And I say, "We are." And one of the caveats I give to them usually is that this all seems to have evolved in our specific field just over the last few months. On social media, every single day, there's tons of different ads on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, relating to every one of them has the fastest, best AI program, and they can churn out a chronology, a complaint, a demand letter in 3 minutes. None of that is really true. I mean, it's true, but certainly not the quality that you can do manually. Every day that you use AI, it seems to be improving based on complaints that people make to their AI company who maybe hadn't thought about some of the things that we need done or things that they've got complaints about and their programmers are trying to come up with an answer. I like to tell everyone this is really a first generation program for purposes of personal injury and medical malpractice. And I don't want to date myself or let my age slip, but I remember when computers first came out and I was one of the cynics saying, these Macintosh computers, it takes 40 minutes just for the internet to load. This is never going to be something we'll ever use going forward. Obviously, I was really wrong back then. The other thing I think Jen touched on is the difference between med mal and PI as it relates to hearing what the pros and cons are before we even take a case or we're putting a value on the case is that there's so much more information that we have to gather during the life of the case so that if we were actually trying to get that information from the program and ask them for, can you tell us what the pros and the cons are of the case? Or what do you think the settlement value is for this case? The AI program would not have reliable enough information to do that. There's been no complaint drafted yet. There's been no depositions taken in the case yet. There's been no experts that have been hired yet who have provided us with either reports or notes about the case. And so therefore, all those things that AI uses in order to arrive at the pros and cons, along with medical literature and legal research, those things don't necessarily happen at the time a PI case can actually give you a more reliable number. So for us, the case has to be more ready for those kinds of things. Now, the pros and cons, they can give you a general thing, but it's not the same in a PI case where you have a police report, somebody gets rear-ended, they go to the doctor, you know what their injuries are. It's an earlier intervention that you can get information than in med mal in some ways. And in our field, and we'll probably touch about this later, one of the difficulties that we have is that the medicine controls these cases. And unfortunately, these AI companies that tout what they do, they're a closed network to the extent that they can't go into the universe with the program and their brain doesn't function where they're getting all the different articles, textbook information, protocols, guidelines, all these things, so that that's not going to necessarily be part of the equation when they evaluate it unless we've uploaded that information already from the outside world. So that's the difference. But whereas in PI, unless it's a trucking accident and there's some sort of national protocols and they can be uploaded, they don't need those things very often. So I think that, Jen is right that it's a difficult for the med mal in that way, but certainly it's amazing how quickly things can be done. I mean, if you upload all the medical records, it could be 10,000 pages of records. In a matter of minutes, you'll get a chronology of the entire care of that patient. Now, is it the kind of chronology that a nurse in our office puts together? No, it's not as thorough, but at least it gives you an idea. Jen is a stickler in wanting to read every single page of the record, and she can give an example of where AI failed in a case that we've had where the AI didn't think something was important or there was something they created that didn't exist in the record. And unless you actually read the record, I mean, that information would be sent off to an expert who would probably base his opinion in part on that note that didn't exist. And that would screw up the whole case. So maybe Jen can add to that in terms of giving an anecdotal episode of what happened.
I think that AI, like pretty much anything in life, has its pros and cons. And I think that one thing all lawyers need to do if they're going to institute AI in their practice is be cognizant that, like humans, right, it can make mistakes. In this particular situation, we were using a closed platform, so it should not have been quote unquote hallucinating, as some of us may know that term in the AI world, which essentially just means that the bot is creating something out of nothing. This should be a program that does not hallucinate. And had uploaded a few thousand pages of records that I had previously reviewed the old school way with a pen, paper, and a highlighter, and written myself some, scratched notes. And I knew when this particular patient had a PSA level, which is a test done to check your prostate function. And I knew what dates that individual had had that test. And when I put everything in AI and I wanted to do a quick summary of those records so I could get it off to an expert and just be able to not look at my chicken scratch and just be able to place it in to an email, the AI bot had created a very specific date, said that this individual had this test on June 9th, which I remember because it was my birthday. So it seemed to be poking me a little. So June 9th, 2021, that this individual had a PSA test. And I thought to myself, gosh, this thing's amazing. I looked through those pages, with a fine tooth comb, I thought, and I missed this PSA levels. And when I asked what it was relying on for this PSA level, it responded back to me saying, my apologies, that does not exist.
Oh, wow.
I've corrected the chronology, which was incredibly worrisome because that's what the case was about. I was about to write an email and now I was very confused. But had I not previously reviewed those records, it was a very reasonable blood level that he did not have, but would have made sense chronologically. It would have been an important component. And so here we were with data, which would have been very believable if you just relied on it, very understandable, would have made perfect sense. And very easily, I could have taken that, called an expert, told them, hey, here are this individual's PSA levels, and those would have gotten into an expert's notes and it didn't exist. So, had I not previously reviewed the records, that would not have jumped out to me as something that was wrong, which is worrisome moving forward.
Totally. Now, could AI help predict case outcomes or settlement ranges, and what risks come with relying on those predictions?
Well, I think that it's another tool that can be used to help predict it. I don't think that one that's at least experienced in doing this would ever use it as the only or the ultimate tool, at least at this point, because the way that these AI programs work, which are essentially a closed platform, the information we give them, coupled with what some of the information they load onto the program's brain, are is what is used. So you don't have, for instance, you don't have a national sampling that the AI puts together for you. They don't even have a Connecticut sampling. And I think they do a pretty good job in terms of coming up with a range. And I know that depending on what you ask the bot to do, you can ask for a low range, a medium range, and a high range for the case value. And what we did when we first obtained this program was we actually sampled it with some cases that were already closed that had resolved. And we found that it was a decent indicator. It wasn't great, but it was sufficient. I actually think that not that we're so exceptional, but I think that because of the sheer volume of cases that we handle from a med mal standpoint and the knowledge of historical data that helps us as we move forward, it's probably less necessary for us than someone, for instance, that's a solo practitioner or a firm that only has a couple of med mal cases, over their course of their career, and they don't have other people that they can use as a sounding board. What do you think the value of the case is? Because you can't just go home and ask your wife, "What do you think the case is worth?" That's not going to be the sampling of what the value is. So I think that it helps. It reinforces for you that you probably are in the range because we do know based on having so many cases, we can pretty much predict a range. And I think not just us, but anyone that in this business on both sides of the case, plaintiff side, defense side, if you actually had cases and you had a piece of paper and you asked everyone to write down what their number was on what the case was worth, we probably come in a range of between 500,000 if it's a large case of where the case is. So I think that we all have our own historical data that helps us come to the present and have a better understanding because most of these cases, there are some exceptions, are repeat fact patterns. Mistakes in different fields come up again and again and again. A death case has a variety of different values depending on a number of different factors, including age, kind of injury, was it a death? Is the person paralyzed? Is it a birth injury case where there's a tremendous amount of future medical costs because the child has continuing costs over their lifetime? So there's a lot of different factors that come into play. And fortunately, we have had enough of these cases where we have a good idea of what the settlement value is and also what the verdict value is. AI can't do that for you from a med mal standpoint without the outside world information coming in. Fortunately for us, we already know what the outside world is because you can just look on our website and see what the outside world is. Or just being part of this, we hear about other lawyers, what they settle cases for. We hear what the verdicts are on other lawyers. So there's a little bit more of a predictability that's able to help us. So the long-winded answer is AI assists us, but we don't use it as the end all be all to predict what we would ultimately demand in the case.
I'll just add one kind of comment to that. So I think that there's kind of two different things going on with AI right now. And I don't want to be too simplistic in how we look at this, which I'm sure I am because even my knowledge is not that much, but there are multiple different programs, right? So you have your kind of broad open networks available to the public at large, and I think that those types of networks, an open network or an open AI has access to whatever's on the internet, right? Some large open network that's publicly available, what is the settlement range for X type of case? I think they're going to pull from all over the world. The downside of your kind of open public networks is you're not going to put your client, whether it's PI or MedMal, your client's personal information in, right? So, what you're going to get as an output as far as settlement range are very broad things, right? What is the value of a birth injury case in Connecticut? That's very broad, right? What are your client's medical specials? What are your client's earning capacity? How good is liability? How strong is causation? Does this child require lots of medical care or have they made a good recovery? You can summarize that, but you can't necessarily put all of the data in. However, that open network is going to be able to pull from a lot more sources than a closed network. So then if you go to the closed network world, you can put, if it's HIPAA compliant, like many of them are, and the one we use is, you can put all of your clients' data in. So that's good, right? It can be much more specific about how much the medical specials are to date, what the earning capacity claim is, how many different providers the individual treats with, the strength of your case, etc. However, that closed network isn't pulling from all of the data in the world about settlements and verdicts. So, if you're on an open system, you're very general. If you're on a closed system, you're very specific about your client, but lack the data about the rest of the world. And so, only what that closed network has been trained on, whatever it's been told by its company as far as verdict ranges, is what you're limited to. And so I think to tie in Russ's point, is that much more useful than 35 years of experience talking to friends and colleagues at the bar, reading verdicts and settlement pages, staying up to date with your, Connecticut trial lawyers events? I don't know that it offers a ton more. And one last little thing, I think that right now, the simpler your case, the better the AI is going to be at valuing those cases. I think that they have been pretty well trained in kind of your more simple rear end accident on I-95. I think they're a little bit better at that because of the amount of data than a complex malpractice case. So I think it's a tool. Why not use it if you have access to it? But whichever path you go down, there are specific limitations.
I'm definitely seeing the trend here, the relationship with AI, and now I'm curious about the discovery area. In what ways is AI transforming discovery, such as analyzing medical records, imaging, or expert testimony for malpractice and injury cases?
I think that the verdict is, I don't want to say the verdict's still out on it. I think that, like everything else about AI, it's a learning experience. I just found out just yesterday, I asked the bot, can you please come up with questions to ask the defendant doctor? And they rattled off at a deposition. There were like 50 questions that were rattled off. And I'm like, that's great for someone like me who is either time constrained or I waited too long to get ready for the deposition. However, one of the downsides of this is I'm a younger lawyer and I haven't gone through the process of taking thousands of depositions. And I know the process. If you're a younger lawyer, all the foundational things that you should learn as a lawyer are being taken care of by AI for you. So the question that I pose is, how do you know if they know that the questions that AI is giving to them to ask at the deposition are actually the relevant questions as it relates to that specific case? And so without being someone with the experience of doing this, no different with research. Our AI program, none of them have a legal research component to it, but there are separate AI legal research programs that a lot of attorneys use. But again, that takes the place now of what you learned in law school and how to do research and writing and how what we call shepherdized the cases and get to the point where you have the most recent case that's right on point with the case that you're arguing about. If you haven't done that, if you haven't gone through the process, and been an associate and done research for several years, and they're spitting out to you on AI the cases or a legal argument that's being made, how do you know if that's the right argument if you've never done the research and writing before? And so it worries me about the next generation or even my generation if they're just plain lazy, how do they even know those cases are real? How do they know they're actually relevant? And I think that again, it all goes back to the fact that while in some industries AI is everything, and I think it's for technology, it's going to change the world for better or worse. In our world, up to this point, we're not as far along with AI in terms of the companies, the entities that actually provide the programs because they're learning also as they go along. They weren't personal injury or medical malpractice lawyers. So when they created the program, they didn't necessarily have all the nuances that are important to our practice. And then as people try to use the program and they have their support team, and you're calling them every day saying, "Can you do this? Can you do that?" And they're saying, "Not yet." And so that makes them think about, well, let's see if we can do that. And I think that we're learning together. I mean, the company that we chose, it frankly is very good. I mean, I was the one who spearheaded this whole idea. 2, 3 years from now, we will see a much more advanced AI in the personal injury and malpractice field. And I think it'll be incredibly helpful more than it is today on our end. I mean, I think on the personal injury side, and not to demean that PI is somehow easier, but I do think that when Jen said it's simpler, I think she's right about that in the sense that there's less complex issues that come up for these cases. And so AI is great with that. Ours, there's more complexities involved, and there's so many more issues involved that they haven't thought about when they created the program that makes it a little bit tricky and makes you have to be careful that what you're doing is actually accurate. And I know that Jen gave the example of the hallucinated or laboratory data, which if that had been sent to an expert and we ran with it and she hadn't read all those pages of medical records, we would have looked like a fool at some point during the process. We might have taken a case that we shouldn't have taken. We might have not been prepared for a deposition properly, or her research would have been different, gone down another theory. And so I think that those are angles that still they make me nervous because you make sure that your firm isn't exposed for creating their own malpractice by doing something wrong. But there's so many different areas of what we do, including the medical research and the legal research, and it has to be right. And I think that when something like that happens, when they have the hallucinated laboratory data, it's going to be in the back of your mind or maybe even the front of your mind that I better look at everything, which defeats the purpose of AI in the first place, which is everything will be faster and better, more efficient. I find it amazing that they can do a mediation statement very quickly, that they can draft a complaint quickly, that they can do a demand letter quickly, they can do a medical chronology quickly. But again, I view everything as a first draft on AI that you have to embellish on and make it better. And I try to tell this as we have quickly accelerated our use of AI as we're uploading all our files and doing the work with it, the storyline and the programs all have disclaimers on anyway, so they know it's not perfect. So we're telling everyone, remember, this is just a draft. It doesn't take the place of your work. And you have to do all the reviewing and make sure that it's right. And so I think that that's in my mind the pros and cons. We got off topic a little bit about valuing the case is where we started, but I do think that there's pros and cons to AI in general. I think it's amazing what's evolved. But again, in our field, which has always been built on diligence and hard work and research, you still have to do all those things. It doesn't take the place, at least in our field. I can't speak for if I'm a real estate lawyer and I'm doing a contract, it probably spits a contract out in like 3 seconds. We don't have that luxury in our world where if they spit out that quickly, that it means it's a comprehensive enough product and is it right?
Now, on the heels of that, how do attorneys ensure AI assisted evidence review maintains accuracy and avoids bias? And most importantly, you're not wasting time doing the extra research and making sure that it's accurate.
I think it's a good question, and I don't know if there's an answer yet, right? So I think that the way I've approached the AI situation, right, is that I use it. I use it honestly most days, whether that is our paid for PI bed now specific program or some sort of medical research AI, or some sort of open, just ask a quickie question to AI on some sort of open network. I use it, I would say most days, maybe not every day, but most days. But how do you confirm it's accurate? I think that's the part that we're here for, right? I think that's what the lawyer has to be here for. I do think there is going to be maybe a point along the way where we can trust it more, but I don't know that we can have the bot do the work and then have to check it, which does seem a little bit like a do it twice exercise, except the bot took 5 minutes. And so you're not wasting that much time to have the bot do it and then you check it. And I think that it might even still be more efficient, right? What I think that even if the bot were to be wrong or even if you had to check it, it gives you an area to look at, right? So in my abnormal lab study situation, the program we have, I could click on kind of like a footnote that it was relying on. And so when I clicked on the footnote that it was relying on and there was no PSA level there, it really raised a question immediately. I went back to my records to the PSA levels. I saw that that wasn't there. I then asked the question, what are you relying on? So, yes, it was wrong and it could have been very dangerous in our practice. And yes, I had to check it. However, it still kind of got me asking those questions and looking back at the levels myself and using the hard copy. I think that when you're doing discovery and you need a quick answer, like today I asked during a certain admission, did this patient have an ultrasound? And very quickly it told me the page I should look at. Okay, well, now I have, you can't see it, but I have in front of me a big stack of old school paper records. And now I know what day in that 5-day admission to look at. So I'm still going to do the more, labor intensive, human verified double checking, but I was able to do that. I think the other thing it's really good at is if you have 30 cases and an expert calls you out of the blue because they want to talk about X case, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, goodness, I haven't touched that case in a month. And the expert has a specific question. I can pull up my AI program, pull up that file, and ask an AI assistant, give me a paragraph summarizing this case, or who are the defendants in the case. If the expert asks me a specific question, hey, I was looking back at my file and I wanted to know on what date did X happen. I can ask, what date did X happen? Not look like I don't know what I'm talking about. Quickly check the footnote on the program to make sure it's accurate and answer the doctor within literally seconds, right? So even though it is imperfect and even though Russ is right, I always sound like kind of the negative person in the firm saying, be careful with AI, be careful with AI. It doesn't mean I don't use it. I actually use it, I don't know how much more compared to everyone, but quite a bit. I'm just very sensitive to if I was going to do a deposition or a trial or a court argument, I wouldn't rely on it, right? I would still do my same processes. I would still do my same work. However, if I said, give me 10 basic questions on preeclampsia to ask the physician, I could double check my own questions, make sure I wasn't missing something. I've done that, right? So I can still use it, but I use it more as a tool than as an actual guide when I'm doing my work.
And while we do have a specific program, a PI, med-mal, class action program, we also have recognized that because it doesn't have everything on there, it doesn't have legal research, it doesn't have medical research, we have sort of an à la carte menu where we've gone outside of our program and we have another program that we use for medical research, which is incredible. A different company, and we use that. And then we have our legal research company, which we've had for years, and we utilize that separately. So we have multiple companies that we do. In a perfect world, everything would be on your program. But until that technology gets perfected to the point where the universe can't be hacked into somehow and see our clients' information, and then subsequently maybe get into our network and get our own personal and our financial information. I mean, that's the problem with what the programs are today. They're a closed platform. it's not a one-stop shop. You have to find outside. I mean, in following up on Jen, I've learned if you upload your file properly and you have the situation where an expert calls you, as Jen said, literally on the homepage, it lists out all the client's personal information. There's a blurb explaining exactly what the fact pattern is for the client, and it's great. It's a combination case management system and a AI personal injury medical malpractice system. And I think that those are things that have helped in a short period of time immensely, especially when you have a volume of cases. It's nice to be able to have those things at your fingertips in a matter of seconds for a discussion that takes place rather than saying, let me call you back or let me open up the file and you got to get to the file and try to find the information. It's literally right there for you. So I think that that's one of the pros to the AI system. It certainly has made me more organized in how I approach things. I have so much more to learn. We've had training sessions. We have more training sessions coming up. There are things that I don't even know that we can probably do. I was hoping, yesterday, I said, it would be nice if we could take a 10,000-page medical record and it comes in from the hospital unorganized the way we like it. You ask the bot, can you please organize this record? With the hope that we get a whole 10,000-page medical record completely organized. What we ended up getting was the chronology instead of the actual record. And obviously, that's where my technology of a boomer comes into play. They snickered at me and saying that maybe this will never be able to be done, that kind of thing. And it probably is true. But at the same time, there are things that at least I've learned that I didn't know or didn't know what prompt to ask. And it's a work in progress from both them and us all the way around.
I think, as you mentioned, it's a work in progress. AI is this ever evolving field. So, talking about that, how might AI tools, maybe in the near future, shape trial strategy from jury selection to real time analysis of testimony?
I think that you would have to have enough information about the participants in juries in order to be able to get that information. So, for instance, at least in Connecticut, you're not provided information of prospective jurors of the day until the day of their appearance as a juror. In Connecticut, things are done different than every other state in the country. Believe it or not, we're the only state where you have individual jury selection. So each juror gets interviewed individually. And the process is much more tedious, takes a lot longer, can take weeks sometimes to get your jury. So a lot of times you have all these prospective jurors that come in, they give you a sheet, we get a small bio of them, and we can, I guess, if you are savvy enough and quick enough, scan in the information, upload it, and you could ask those questions, ask AI, what kind of jurors do we want on this case based on the information that we have on the case in general? And then see if any of these people fit that profile. What are the good and the bad about each one of these jurors as it relates to the case? I think that that's the kind of thing that could probably be invaluable if it's reliable. But who knows? Everything in this business is who knows. We don't have a crystal ball, and everyone thinks that they're more intuitive than the next person, and they got the best jury. And over the years, I've had people that I thought were going to be the greatest jurors, and they're nodding at you during trial, and they're smiling at you, and they're the ones that vote against you. Whereas it the stoic one that just looks at you as if it would disdain ends up being the foreman who loves you. AI adds a scientific component to it. I really think that I'll always be leery that it's not that there's a human component to everything. And I think that AI will never be able to feel what the client is going through like we do, and they can't necessarily express it the way we do. As we say, it's a work in progress, and it's actually fascinating to me.
So my thought process on this is I don't know if we know all the ways, right? But I do think where it's going to help, maybe not so much with jury selection, but putting on evidence is the idea that in 4 seconds, Dr. So and so or ex deponent testifies to something. You can ask the bot, you can type what they testified to. They said they do not recall ordering that lab study. And if they said the opposite at their deposition, you would know that in seconds, right? So for impeaching witnesses, for getting testimony out that is contradictory to what they testified before, it's just going to make, I think, all of us so much more efficient, right? So I think there's an efficiency to it. Not that going to that trial you shouldn't know, but especially for an answer you weren't expecting. Like maybe you're expecting this is going to be the area where the doctor kind of jousts with you a little bit on the medicine, but they end up saying something else entirely different. Your AI thing, if it was listening, either transcribing it or someone is sitting with you at trial and able to ask in the questions, could get you that answer in milliseconds. So you could look absolutely seamless in how you're asking these questions. I think that you can get your transcript from the day before and upload them to an AI bot, so you actually have access to your transcripts, your court transcripts from the day before, as opposed to getting them at 5 o'clock from the court reporter, spending 5 to 10 p.m. trying to digest them after you've had a long day. Those things are literally at your disposal immediately because they're now in your AI bot. So I think that, yes, it will make us more efficient and more specific at trial. The flip side of that, I think, is that if you just rely on an AI bot to say, what question should I ask Dr. So and so at trial, you should consider the fact that your opponent can ask the same bot, what will, Jen ask my doctor at trial? And so I was recently watching a, late night TV show on something totally different, talk about AI and what it would do. And that individual's guest, so I'm borrowing, this thought said something about no matter what field you're in, if you're in AI, the human that can beat the AI is the one that will win, right? And so that's kind of how I think of AI, is that if you're asking a doctor these questions, your opponent might already have them. But if you can be the one that takes the AI questions and makes them better, or more specific, or more related to your case, then you're the one that can outsmart the bot and maybe your opponent. So I think you use it. I think you use it as the start of your questions, but I think that you have to be conscientious that your opponent has the same access to that. So borrowing from this guest is the idea that if you're the lawyer that does the work on top of the I think you're the one that gets the better result.
That's such a great point. That's such a great point.
And the bots themselves have become much more advanced than they were. I mean, we use on our after hours, instead of just having a voicemail service after hours, if somebody reaches out through us through our website after hours overnight, we have a chat bot that they can, ask if they have a potential case. The bot actually screens you and gives us information that gets sent to us for an email. So in the morning, they're told by the bot that we'll reach out to them the next day. And we already have more than just, I have a potential medical malpractice case. We actually know what the case is about, what hospital it may have happened at, or doctor's offices, when it happened. And they do a little bit of a soft screen for us, which saves us a lot of time in terms of whether we want to even, look into the case even further versus just responding by email to the prospective person saying sorry, but it's just not something we're interested in. That's why I find the whole technology incredible, and I'm careful on what I'm looking at, but I'm still amazed at everything. I mean, not to belabor this and sound old again, but if you remember, I never could understand how a fax machine worked when they first came out. How could something that was being faxed from California in a matter of 40 seconds or a minute, it comes here to Connecticut? I mean, these are people that are genius in technology, and I respect what they do, and I continue to look forward to the next level. So, when Jen is saying that it can't do certain things, and I say it can't do certain things, I'm anticipating that most of the things will eventually happen. When? Difficult to tell. But I'm anticipating that it'll be new and improved along the way, and it'll really be very, very helpful for what we do in our practice.
Now, are courts and judges receptive to AI generated insights, or is there skepticism about admissibility and reliability?
I don't actually know, honestly, whether depending upon how you use it, and it may just be my naivete because I haven't used it in that sense, but I'm not sure whether the courts would necessarily recognize even that you used, an outline from an AI, right? Especially, I've never submitted anything to a court that was specifically AI generated, right? I may have an AI idea or the start of a paragraph, anything that has been filed from our office or any deposition outline that I've utilized has been massaged, edited, reworked, multiple times. So it's not per se AI generated. Where I think that, and this is not speaking from my personal experience or our firm's experience, but when you read these things in the news, I think that where the courts are having real concerns about AI generated information or AI generated items is that depending upon the service you're using, if there are literal inaccuracies, right? AKA a case doesn't exist, that you've cited Smith versus Jones and Smith versus Jones is not a case in that jurisdiction. I think that the courts are getting, really leery and frustrated by this stuff because they don't want to come up with bad rulings based on an AI hallucination, right? I think you're seeing that stuff. I think you're seeing concerns over products that seem very, very rogue, right? It's the plaintiff X and no thought process. It sounds bot generated. I can't imagine a judge, getting some sort of pleading or information and it sounding so robotic that they can obviously see it's from a bot. I think that they would not look kindly to that. I think all of us have seen that, right? There's enough AI out there in our everyday worlds. You play something in and you have a sense. I don't know that that's human written. I can't imagine the judges are respecting that. However, I think everyone, whether they're a judge, a lawyer, a client, is going to be more and more comfortable with AI literally after every day forward, every month forward, every year forward. So I would think that the judges are aware that this is out there. I think the bigger practice point is make sure you know what system you're using because as Russ was saying, we have to have a menu of different AI sources we're using because legal research, true legal research done on an AI bot has to be with a program which only has access as a closed network of just real cases. Because AI bots can hallucinate or create or be creative about naming new cases or interpreting cases in a way that you want to make sure that your legal research bot is a closed network and only has real cases so it can't hallucinate a case, right? So I think it goes back to educating yourself if you're going to invest as a law firm in a program for whichever purpose, if it's legal research, if it's case management, if it's medical research, that is actually doing what you're saying, not just kind of these open networks. But I think you have to be careful. I think that judges, are bright and they don't want to be, bamboozled, so to speak, by some AI generated, case law that's fake and then they buy into it and then they're overturned on appeal, right? That's the stuff that I think the courts are concerned over.
Judges have actually sent a message to attorneys by sanctioning lawyers who have used cases that don't exist in their briefs. I read a case from, I think it was a Florida case. A lawyer was sanctioned $10,000 because he was using hallucinated literature for his case law. I think they're sending a message to the bar that you want to use AI, that's fine, but you come into my courtroom, you better make sure that the cases are real cases. And I think people take notice of that.
Yeah, and I think the reason is important, right? What we do as a profession is whether it's civil, whether it's criminal, has people's liberty, life, monies, well-being on the line. And so if a judge is making an important decision about whether or not someone should be incarcerated if it's criminal or if someone should be, found liable in a civil case for many thousands or millions of dollars, they want to make sure that they're basing those decisions off reality, right? Not basing off the fake Smith versus Jones case that so and so cited and was really, really well written. And it seemed very an interesting approach to handling this issue. And all of a sudden, someone's life, liberty, damages, whatever it might be, is on the line. So I think as a profession, I think it's a good reminder of what we're supposed to be doing and why judges are sanctioning people or people are getting in trouble, because it's not just, a minor thing. These decisions could have large scale, broad implications, whether it's for one individual or an entire body of the law.
Russ Berkowitz, managing partner at Berkowitz and Hanna Law Firm. Jen Amdur, partner at Berkowitz and Hanna Law Firm. Thank you both for making time to talk to us today.
Happy to do so. It's a topic you could talk a lot about, and I'm sure there'll be, in 6 months, we can have a follow up because things might have changed. But thanks for your time, Monty.
Always great seeing you, Monty.